I started a band called Colours, and we used to rehearse in the common room where we used to serve food. And what happened was, then one day a guy came down with a saxophone, and he said he wanted to join the band, and he wasn't very good. So, and he said, I'll be your manager. He was like a rich kid, Jonathan Weston. So he became our manager, and then it's a long story, but then he met a guy called Denny Cordell, who was like a big-time producer. And so then, after he became our manager, he fired 3 of the guys from the band. But as he sort of had the money, we sort of went along with it. Then we found another guy in Carnaby Street who was Ian, who had a great voice. So we formed it. Then it became the Pyramid. And then we made a record, which is called The Summer of Last Year. And then we were playing around, we were doing okay. Then what happened, well, there's a few things. First I got electrocuted and blown off the stage and fractured my spine. So I was already thinking about it, maybe not.
Where was that? Where was that concert when that happened?
Ironically enough, it was at the Royal College of Art. It was our triumphant return.
Oh, Jesus. God.
Yeah.
Unforgettable.
And then he wanted, Jonathan Weston wanted us to work with this Tony Visconti, who went on to produce David Bowie, etc., etc. And Tony Visconti wanted to move the band in like a different direction, not using stuff that I had written. So everyone it all sort of went a bit strange. And then I got a phone call from Tony Hall, who was a big DJ at that time, and he asked me if I wanted to join a band called Fairport Convention, and I said, well, I'm not really a singer, so I recommended Ian. So Ian became a member of Fairport Convention, and that was it. The band finished then. It sort of like, it was going really well, and quite a few things happened that kind of made it fall apart.
But you got electrocuted twice, right?
Well, I got badly electrocuted the first time when I fractured my spine, and then the time when we came out of hospital, I came out of hospital, the first place we played at was Leicester Corn Exchange, and everyone else went out for a kind of drink, and I was still kind of nervous, so I put my guitar on the floor, and I turned my amp on, and then I touched the mic, and then when I touched the strings, it went bam, like that. So I didn't get electric shock, but I knew that if I touched the mic, I would. So I spent the entire time playing like about that far away from it. And so I realised then that I developed a phobia for electric guitars.
Yeah, for good reason. But not so much that you don't have 50 of them.
Well, what happened was then I gave up the whole idea of being in a band and became a photographer. Tried to become a photographer, and then when I came to France, after about 2 years, a friend of mine, Keith, came from London, because I still had a Stratocaster, but I didn't plug it in. And he said, come on Steve, let's go to Pigalle. So I went to Pigalle and bought an amplifier, and then off I was again.
For how long?
Till now.
Wow.
And in a way, the thing is, I'm so obsessed with, I don't think I'm a very good guitar player, but I'm obsessed with guitar playing. So I spend maybe too much time trying to play guitar, trying to figure out. No, but I hear something on a record and I have to figure out how it was done. So I can spend a long time trying, what did he do there? What was that? I'm obsessed by stuff like that. And then when I find it out, it's really good. Because what happens is that when you're trying to find out what the guy did, you're kind of trying different things all over the neck. So you also discover a lot of things that you'd have never thought of while you're fumbling around looking for what he did.
And you played with Jimi Hendrix too.
I didn't play with Jimi Hendrix. I took pictures of Jimi Hendrix.
Ah, okay. How was that?
Well, in fact, I have a book coming. I'm doing a book about it. So the explanation of how that happened will be in the book.
And what's the name of the book?
It's going to be called Out of Control. I have think I have the cover here somewhere.
When's that going to come out?
We don't know because we're just now showing it to people to try and get people interested.
How many books have you done?
Not many.
The Blondes?
I did a book called Down on the Road by the Beach, which came out with this album. Then I did a book called Pleasure Places, which was a book of little street corners. And then I did Blonde on Blonde. No, Blonde on Blonde.
Yeah.
Beyond Blonde.
Yeah.
And then this is going to be, hopefully, the next one.
This is great. I love it. It's like 3D.
So that's the next thing.
Can you open it?
Well, yes, it's not good. It was the very first maquette. It's horrible.
Okay.
But it's... Okay.
Wow, I love it.
So it'll look like that, like this.
It's great, so you can combine two loves of your life.
Yeah. So...
What was your first photo commission?
What was my first thing I ever did?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it was... I put together a book of my pictures, and I went round to all the magazines in London, and no one was interested. And I thought, I'll go to Nova, which was the top magazine, which is, I think it was in Southampton Street. It was called Tower House, and Nova was on the top floor because it was the most prestigious. And then when you went down one floor, it was 19 magazine, and then Honey, you know. And then as it went down and down, it got less and less prestigious. I ended up in the basement, right? It was a magazine called Mirabelle, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a teenage magazine. It was like love story, cartoon love stories of girls, you know, falling in love with guys and love stories. And the guy said to me, he said, I always like to start the story with a photograph of couples kissing, and then that leads into the story. So he said, if you can give me a picture of a couple, he said, I'll give you £5 a print, right?
Big time.
So I said, well, actually £5 wasn't bad. And then, so I got all my friends, couple friends, and I went all around London, photographed them kissing, phone boxes, in the street, in the park, everywhere. And I had a friend who had he had like an enlarger in his bathroom, so I printed up all these kissing couples.
Mm.
And I ended up with like 80 pictures of kissing couples. And I went in and he said, great, he gave me £160, I think. What's 80 times 5?
I think it's more than that, isn't it?
Is it? And that was my first
Yeah,
job,
it's
and I
much
thought,
more
this is
than
big
that.
time.
It's almost 400.
Is it?
Well,
It was
my
a lot of
math
money in
is
those
going
days.
back. Wow.
So that was my first ever job, commission job.
We should show that, no? It'd be fun.
Well, if you can find it.
Yeah. Wow.
I've tried.
Yeah.
I'm sure the publisher must have it was published by, who published Nova? IPC.
So Mirabelle and Nova were the same publisher?
Well, it was the whole
Ah,
building
right,
was owned by the
okay.
publisher. Their Prestige magazine was at the top. And as you went
Okay.
down, then it ended up, I don't know, motorbike magazines, and then gardening magazines, and then in the basement was Mirabelle, this teenage love magazine.
And what happened after that?
And then they asked me to do a cover, so I did a cover. And I remember absolutely nothing. They said it's in colour, so I kind of had a panic attack. So I bought one roll of film because I thought that would be sufficient. And we went to Primrose Hill, and I photographed a girl in a pink raincoat. I remember.
Was she a blonde?
Probably. And it came out as a cover. And then as I went to I had an idea, because I knew Zandra Rhodes from the Royal College. So I
Pink
used to
hair.
go and see her. And she lived in a basement in Notting Hill. In those days, it was the cheapest part of London. And everything was, she took everything from Woolworths and sort of turned it into other things. And I thought, that's a great idea. So there was a model that I just met called, what was her name? Sandy, believe it or not. It's the name of my cat. And then I got Sandy, and then a girl that I knew from the Royal College, from the textile department, called Jackie. And I said, so we went to Woolworths to buy clothes for this great idea that I had, right? So when we got to Worcester, we found the only clothes they had were like schoolgirls' underwear, so vests, or like knickers, I suppose they used to call them, and roller skates. So we bought 2 vests, 2 knickers, and 2 pairs of roller skates, and we went to Xander Rhodes' place, and I did pictures on 1 roll of film of them sitting around in this Woolworths apartment. So then I took those pictures to Nova, because I thought they might like them, and they said, and they just put them on their lightbox and said, well, maybe we'll call you. So then I heard nothing, and then a few months later I got a phone call from Bridget Keenan, who was the beauty editor of Nova, and she said, oh, I've seen these pictures that I really like, can you come in and explain them to me? So I went in and I explained. She says, oh, that's great, we're going to use them. And what are you going to do, what are you doing tomorrow? She said, will you do a fashion story for us? So I said, okay. So then it was like, I had to learn fast. So I called up Peter Webb, who used to photograph us when we were in the band. He was a great photographer. And I said, listen, I got this job in the studio. I don't know anything about to do that. He said, just come to my place and I'll do all the lighting for you. So that's how it started.
That's great. That was pretty quick from the basement to the top.
Yeah. And then, because of that, then suddenly I started working for I worked then for American Vogue.
Who was the editor-in-chief?
Her name was Beer, I think. Beer somebody. B. They used to call her Miss B. I thought, I don't know. I just remember that she had a door. She had her own office, and there was a door, a sign that said yes or no. It means you could go in or you couldn't.
It's like a sound studio.
No, there was the fashion department, and in one corner there was her office had a door, and it was always closed, and it either said yes or
you
no. You
can enter or you can't.
So you could go in or you couldn't.
I wonder if Anna does that.
I don't know. Maybe. These days you would do something else. But anyway, and then as I started shooting for Nova, I had this idea for a story about suntans. So they sent me to Mallorca to do a suntan story, and I rented a Vespa, and I'd heard about this photographer called Max Maxwell. He used to work for Queen magazine, who I thought was fantastic. So I said, I have to meet this guy, and I found out he was living in a village called Dea, which is now very fashionable, but in those days was a tiny little village. And so I rented a scooter, and I was driving to go to Dea, and then I suddenly saw a sign that said, it was a picture of a camera, which meant that was a good place to take a picture. This was like 1969, I guess. So my reflex was to stop, but I put on the wrong brake. Instead of putting on the back brake, I put on the front brake. So I went over the handlebars and I sort of slid down the road, and all my hand was completely opened up. So luckily, and then it started raining, and it was very stormy. So the blood was like blowing onto my clothes. It looked a lot worse than it was. And then when I got to Dale, this little kid came up to me. He said, in American accent, he said, you have to come to my house because so my mum can fix you up, right? So I said, okay. So it turned out that her name was Toby Molyneux. She was a reportage photographer, and her husband was Fred Grunfeld, who was the editor of Queen magazine, which was the most trendy magazine in England at the time. So the first thing they did was they took me, the only place that was open on a Sunday, because it was a Sunday, was at the bullfight. So they took me to the bullfight in the back, and they laid me on a table, which is where they would lay the bullfighter if they got injured. And then I remember they just pinned my arm down and they scrubbed it with alcohol, because it was all open and full of grit and dirt. So it was like agony for a minute, but it was then it was completely cured. So anyway, then when I went back to London, I started working for Queen magazine. So I was doing Nova, English Vogue, and Queen.
That's great.
So it's funny how things work out.
And what year was this?
This must have been 1968, 69.
And it just kept going from there.
And then I built a little studio in Drury Lane with a friend of mine. And I started actually doing always, because as I sort of learnt the lighting from Peter Webb, I thought I can make a fortune with this lighting, because at that time no one was doing lighting like that. So I had a tiny studio about half the size of this room, all painted white with this, what was then a secret lighting of Peter Webb. And I was mixing that with Kodachrome, so people were queuing up to get my beautiful studio pictures, which of course I'm not known for anymore, but that's how I started.
Wow, that's great.
And
So you have some of those?
I have hardly anything.
Well, a couple.
I have a few tear sheets maybe.
Yeah.
But you see, in those days you didn't think, it was like driving a bus. You did it and then, you didn't even keep, you kept a few slides you like, but it wasn't like now where it's all kind of like high art form and I can't explain it. So I was doing that, and then I was living in Shaftesbury Avenue in Soho, on the corner of Soho, and one day I was going down for a cup of tea, and I bumped into a friend of mine, and he said, "Have you heard about Frank?" And Frank was an assistant of this photographer, I forget her name. Anyway, and he said, he's in France cleaning up. He's in Paris, he's doing this magazine, this magazine, this magazine. And I thought, if he can clean up in Paris, so can I. So what happened was that 6 months before, my good friend Leon Duffman, who was my agent, said we should go to Paris and see as many. So we came to Paris, and the only people that we managed to see was Madame Lazarus at Marie Claire magazine. She was really kind to us, and she said, if you ever come back to Paris, let me know. So I got my accountant gave me £100 in cash, because I don't know, at that time I was broke again. I always seem to be broke, right? So I came here with £100 in cash, and a little friend of mine called Dominique, who I'd met in the early 60s, because I used to work on the beach in the summer, and I used to meet French girls, you just did. So she gave me her address. So in those days, didn't. So I sent her a little letter saying, "I'm coming to Paris. Can you find me a hotel?" So she found me a hotel. She sent me back a letter saying, with this hotel and it was in Place Émile Goudeau, which is in Montmartre. It's where the Bateau Lavoir is, where Picasso painted. It was a little cheap hotel, and it was 15 francs a night. So I stayed there, and I was thinking, that's great, this hotel. And I had the top floor, so I used to look right across Paris. I went back, it's a luxury hotel now. But and then every time I go down in the morning, I see all these ladies sitting around in dressing gowns, and I suddenly realised what this hotel was. Anyway,
Love hotel.
It was so that's how it started. Then I moved to a cheaper hotel because I was running out of money. Then I moved to a bar in Rue de Seine, which was 5 francs a night, which is like €1, I suppose now. And that really was the place. I had one room with no window, and I just heard clunk, 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 clunk past my door all night, because there was obviously girls upstairs.
God, you're always drawn to these love hotels.
Well, and so then what happened was that I finally got a job with Votre Beauté, doing a beauty picture, and so I did this picture, and it was the day that I'd completely run out of money. I couldn't pay my rent anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I turned up at Votre, and I did this and she was an American model, and she said, "Oh, where do you live in Paris?" I said, "Well, actually, I don't live anywhere now, because this is it. I'm going to have to go home." And she said, "Oh, well, I've got a room on the top floor where you can stay there." So I said, "Oh, thanks." So I moved in. So it's another lucky break. And then her husband was a well-known art dealer, and he found out that she had a lover, right? So he was steaming on his way back to France, because he was in New York. He thought it was me, but it wasn't. So I called up I had the assistant that day, Michel Viard, who Sarah Moon had recommended to me, and I said, "Do you know anywhere I can stay?" And he said, "Well, we live in a hippie commune at the Gare de l'Est. You can come and stay there." So I piled all my stuff into, I don't know how I got to there, and I moved in. So that's where I was living. And then I slowly, I got a bit of money here, a bit of money there. I managed to keep surviving. And then one day I kept going to Marie Claire because Madame Lazarus said, you know, you should speak, just keep coming. So I used to go every week, and I used to have conversations with Emile Logier, who was the art director. And then it was August. And August in 1972, it was like, Paris was like a movie set. There was nobody. They always used to go away in August. And I was sitting there thinking, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And then I got a phone call, and it was Madame Lazarus, and she said, can you do a job for us? And what happened was, in those days, as everyone left Paris in August, so did all the photographers. So, as I was the only photographer in Paris in August, I got this job for Marie Claire. It was because of that. And then I did that job, and then they liked it, and I did. Then after that, I worked for them every month for 20 years until 1990.
What happened in 90?
Then everything changed. You know, the sort of the grunge thing started. You know, and so it was photography changed. You know, my bright colours and all that. They didn't want that. They wanted depressed models out of focus, falling out the side of pictures. So my style went completely, it's like just stopped. Everyone I worked for, it just stopped. I had no work at all. So then, as it always rains when it pours, all sorts of things went wrong in my life. I just ended up, like I had to sublet my apartment. I had to live in the back room while all these other people who I didn't know were living in the front. So, and then Louise, my friend Louise, who was in New York, she said, why don't you come to New York? So I went to New York, and I stayed with her for a bit. Then I found out about a place on Horatio Street, which in those days was like a dump, practically, you know, it was the meat market. It was like a dodgy area to live. So I found a little place on Horatio Street, which I still have. And
Hey, you kept it?
Yeah.
And did you own it?
No, I rent it, and then I sublet anyway.
Wow, I bet you can make a lot of money on that now.
So anyway, so I just spent about 4 or 5 years in New York just doing graphics. I designed Arthur Elgort's book because I could do graphics. I did typography for magazines, all stuff like that, and but that's how I survived. It was strange because I used to walk past Industria, the studio, and see all these young photographers dressed like Polish seamen, you know, in terrible old clothes, and in black limousines, you know, obviously making fortunes, and I was, you know, I could just about pay my rent, and that's when I did that picture, because as I was doing, Hiett asked me to do a typography for the magazine, which was also called Mirabelle, but it was Mirabella Cinema. So I was doing typography, and he used to give me a job. So I started shooting again. Then I bumped into Franca Cesani from Vogue, who I used to work for in the 80s. And I bumped into her twice in 1 week. And she said, oh, this must mean something. You know, you have to start working with me again. And I thought, that's what all the fashion people say, right? And then 3 weeks later, I had a phone call, and I was back on a plane to France doing Italian Vogue.
That's fantastic.
So that was the story.
You still stay in touch with her?
Yeah, I still work for her, yeah. Well, I have an exhibition at the moment.
At Corsicum, yeah, David saw it.
Mm. So it's been a very strange up and down kind of story.
Yeah, but you've been here for 12 years, and this is kind of huge.
Yeah. So, and now I feel that maybe everything will now, you know, from my graphics and my kind of music and my photography, I'd like to bring it all together.
And filmmaking.
And do something maybe, yeah. I have done some stuff. I did a thing with Arthur Elgort, a movie I did with him where he just shot the movie and I did the graphics on it. So I was already into putting graphics into film.
Like the generic or what?
I have it somewhere. I'll have to look it up. I can show it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already done a few TV commercials here. Luckily, I didn't know anything about it, so it's good not knowing how to do something, because then you do something without knowing you can't do it, and it usually works out.
Yeah, I like
Because
that
when people say, "Oh no,
mentality.
you can't do that," and you say, "Well, why?" And then they give you a reason, and then but of course you can do it.
But somebody had the confidence to know, like, even if you didn't have the experience.
I think someone. It was the first TV commercial I did was for Mixer Baby shampoo with the Jenna de Ronay, who was and I think someone had seen some of my 80s stuff because it was in the 80s. And I said, and I'd heard about La Pac, which at that point was a very sort of hot, it had Jean-Paul Goude and everybody. So I said, I'd like to do it with La Pac. So, but I didn't realise that, so I just said I want to do that, and that, and that, and like that, and that, and that. And they said, oh, okay. So, so I did it, and then I also did the music, which was good, because I shot it, and it was like this hot summer afternoon with a girl by the pool going into a tent and finding her child. It was a night. But they had this terrible classical music going with it, and I thought, no, I want this trippy sort of guitar, trippy kind of surf music going with it. So I managed to get away with it, because there was one bit where as the wind blew her hair, I did this thing with the guitar, it went whang, just at the same moment her hair. It was perfect.
So they loved
They
it.
wanted some terrible pipe smoking classical guy to do it, but I managed to do that. So
And
that
they
was
were
the first
happy.
thing I did.
Oh. And after
And
that,
I think it was the longest running ever French TV commercial. I think.
oh. Did they give royalties, or what do you call it?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Who knows?
So then I did I did a nice one for a guy called Jacques Bastello called Envie de Partir, but I can't find it anywhere. I've looked for it on YouTube and then a few other things, but it's hard to find, because that was the 80s. Then when I went to the 90s, when I went to New York, I forgot about almost being a photographer. I just thought, well, that's it, I have to do typography now. So it wasn't until I did those pictures with Sam Shahid that I even started thinking maybe I could do pictures again. Because I'd been so, all the magazines that I worked for, they wouldn't even pick up the phone. So I thought, well, this is the way it is. I have to find a new way of making money. So I forgot about photography for like 4 or 5 years almost.
How was
When
it?
I did those pictures for Sam Shahid that I thought, I could do this again.
And then the phone started ringing, or people started picking up.
Yeah, and then I did a story for The Face at the same time, because I met a very nice girl who introduced me to people from The Face, and she introduced me to French Vogue. So I started doing little things for French Vogue and for The Face. So I was kind of like appearing suddenly here and there out of nowhere, and then I started doing Italian Vogue like every month. So things changed, and then as I had still flat broke, I was renting my apartment to two kids that had a magazine called Spoon. So there was a magazine starting to develop in my kitchen. So I used to go into my kitchen, and they said, well, will you do pictures for us? I said, okay. So I started working for Spoon. So doing Spoon, and then Italian Vogue, then suddenly Elle started wanting me to do stuff. So it's
So now we're in the 90s or 2000s?
this is in the 2000s.
Yeah, because now the grunge is over.
Yeah, I don't know what.
So color is back.
Yeah, it all started with that story.
It's beautiful. That's great.
And it's funny because that picture was kind of iconic now. I mean, people think I spent a long time. She had that silver raincoat on, and we were walking down the street, and I just saw that taxi go by with Niagara Airport on the side. I thought, wow, great, because it's, I love type. So we managed to stop the taxi, and we said, can you just run your meter while we do this? So she just jumped in the back of the car. I went click, 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 and he jumped out, and he was off again.
And he was cool about it.
Yeah, I mean, that picture took maybe 4 minutes.
That's great. So life has been cool. When was your first book?
When was my first book?
Yeah.
It was down on the road by the beach, which was 82, 83. Oh no, the first book was Pleasure Places, the little pictures of street corners.
And that had nothing to do with the kind of hotels you were staying in.
No. I'll show it to you. It's. I started doing those pictures when I was in a band, Suburban Street Corners. I'll show it to you.